I've been watching Formula 2 since 2017. That is one of the best performances I've ever seen from any driver across the 8 years. I think this is 8 years now. I've been watching Formula 2. Post race, Alex Dunne was given a 10-second time penalty because of a start procedure infringement. And Arvid Lindblad, who drove a sensational race up to P2, was completely disqualified because of tyre pressure. When you have these sort of things drastically changing the makeup of a championship and the outcomes of feature races, it's very disappointing. Alex Dunn didn't lose his points entirely. He's getting 2 points for ninth place plus 2 points for pole position. If you add the 23 points he's lost here and the 18 points that he lost in Austria because of plank wear, then he's lost 41 points. And if he had those 41 points, he'd be well clear in the Drivers' Championship in F2. This is absolutely ridiculous that a driver that's driving so well has nothing to show for it in terms of championship. The championship standings are not going to reflect who's been the best driver. That qualifying lap from Alex Dunn, that was sensational. You know, the McLaren drivers in F1 have been getting their asses kissed because how they performed in qualifying for Formula One. But don't forget they have a very good car underneath them, a dominating car. Alex Dunn is driving in a spec series and he put 4 tenths on the opposition. The next fastest driver was Ritomo Miata, and when you think about it, 4 tenths is a lot when you consider that drivers two after Ritomo Miata, they're all very close. Right, Fornaroli in seventh place was about 0.15 of a second off, or 1.5 tenths off Miata. So that's how tight it is in Formula 2, and Alex Dunn has cleared them by 4 tenths. That's an amazing effort, amazing. And then to battle in the rain for lap after lap, that was a sensational race. It was an excellent race to watch, and the FIA have spoiled it by their post-race penalty nonsense that they always do. They don't do it in Formula One because Formula One has so many people following it. It's the cash cow of this whole motorsport industry. They can't afford to have nonsense like this going on. But in all the other series like F2, F3, Formula E, they love having post-race penalties for silly nonsense, changing the result, changing the order. It's ridiculous. And as I said, Formula 2 is meant to be the proving ground. Who are the best, fastest young drivers coming through the next generation? And here we are. You would look at the table and you would have no idea how well Alex Dunn has driven this season. You would look at the Formula 2 Championship results page, the standings, and you would have no idea how well Alex Dunn drove today. You would have no idea how well he's driven all season, only to be in fourth in the championship. Anyway, he's only 11 points back, and it's up to him to keep driving well. And I don't know, these penalties, who knows what happens. Maybe it'll hit someone else. I don't know. Before I go on the driver ratings, I just want to talk more about this McLaren business. I'm absolutely appalled by Zach Brown, Andrea Stella, with this amazing drive from Alex Dunn, and they don't even go and watch the podium ceremony. They don't congratulate him after the race. It's like he doesn't exist for them. You know, last year in Austria when Gabriel Bortoleto won the feature race there was Zach Brown standing beneath the podium, making it known that he was there. I'm appreciating my young charger. But of course, Alex Dunn doesn't have the same sponsorship as Gabriel Bortoleto. So, you know, masterclass in the rain. Yeah, who cares? That's where we're at now. And I don't understand why McLaren took on Alex Dunne. I really don't, because if you have no intention of ever promoting him to the F1 seat, why take him into your academy? Same with Martinius Stenson. Why is he there? He can win Formula 2, win races. You're not interested in promoting him to the Formula 1 race team. You have Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris locked in for the next, I don't know, seems like the next 30 years. So you're absolutely wasting the time of these young drivers, absolutely wasting their time. As for driver ratings, Leonardo Fornaroli gets an 8 out of 10. The sprint race was superb. He rocketed into the lead from third on the grid, and he held it and pulled away even after two safety car restarts, even after Victor Martins looked good on his set of tyres. However, the feature race was a little bit disappointing. I think he had some problem with the tyres on the first set of tyres. He dropped down to 10th place after the pit stops. His second set of tyres were much better, and he made his way back up to 7th place, which is a good result. But there's been better results, better performances out there. But 8 out of 10, I think Leonardo Fornaroli can be happy. He drove very well. And of course, after the disqualifications, he now leads the championship. And of course, I think Leonardo Fornaroli would be a very worthy F2 champion this year, except I think Alex Dunn's been even better. I think these two drivers have been the two standouts for me. Fornaroli with his calmness, his steady approach, his consistency, and Dunne the exact opposite. Roman Stanek gets a 10 out of 10 for me. He drove a superb weekend. He qualified very well, and narrowly beating his more highly rated younger teammate. And he's driven a very good race to stay in the top three to take the podium, which became the feature race win. I don't think he really deserves to win the feature race. I can't change what it is. Arthur Lindblad gets a 9 out of 10. The sprint race was very sloppy. He showed a lot of skill in the feature race to come through the field and drove very well. He was disqualified, but he drove very well this weekend. I think giving him less than 9 is very unfair. Pepe Marti gets a 7 out of 10. He's highly experienced, and yet in the the feature race, I think 7 is a bit harsh on Marti. I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. Pepe Marti drove very well this weekend in terms of consistently keeping it on the road. I believe he's finished fourth after all the disqualifications and penalties. Fourth is a good result, but he didn't really earn it. He was outclassed by Arvid Lindblad, but he drove very well in the sprint race. So I think 8 out of 10 is a very good weekend for Pepe Marti. Oliver Goethe gets a 7 out of 10. He drove very well in the sprint race. The eventual podium finishes like Fornaroli and Martins can be very grateful to Goethe because he did a great job in holding up the drivers that were coming through on the soft tyres like Stanek, like Marti. He held them up and allowed their top three drivers to pull away. We saw how Chi and Shields descended through the field, but I think in the feature race, Oliver Goethe was a little bit disappointing. Obviously, him staying out on those tyres a little bit too long allowed us to see that amazing move around the outside of Pujon. I think real motorsport fans will cherish that, and I think in terms of Goethe, he was a bit slow in the feature race, a bit disappointing, but he had the measure of his teammate. And Richard Verschoor gets a 1 out of 10, a highly experienced driver. I just made a video about how good you are and how you don't go and do this. You have a dreadful weekend. I just give him a 1 out of 10. I don't know what to say. He's just very lucky about Dunne's disqualification. He's still in the championship fight. He's 3 points behind Fornaroli. Even after this is why I hate these disqualifications penalties, because you can't see how Richard Verschoor drove, how Jack Crawford drove, and how Alex Dunne drove, and just make any comparison. It's just another world, and there's no reward for the driver that put in the amazing performance. Anyway, Dino Beganovic gets a 7 out of 10. I, I think he's slightly disappointing. The sprint race, I don't think he scored any points, and then in the feature race, he's obviously the last two rounds, the high tech has been strong in the wet. They're both Browning and Beganovic qualified back in the pack, and Beganovic was just a lot slower than Luke Browning. But Luke Browning gets a 9 out of 10. He drove very well. Oh no, I've got to give him an 8 because the sprint race obviously ended on the first corner. In the feature race, he's driven superbly to get fifth place from well outside the top 10 on the grid, coming through the field in the wet yet again, like he did in Silverstone. A very consistent driver, a dark horse for the title, especially since um, the chaos going on around him. Yeah, Luke Browning definitely driving well at the moment, especially in the wet, but the qualifying is disappointing this weekend. Let's see how he holds up in Hungary. Gabriele Mini gets a 7 out of 10. I He probably deserves an 8 out of 10, actually, because he got a podium in the sprint race, and in the feature race, yes, he fell back, but that was the fault of the team, wasn't it? They gave him a slow pit stop. He overtook Leonardo Fornaroli, but then dropped behind him in the pit stop phases. That's not Mini's fault. So Mini drove very well this weekend. Has kept it on track, made up for the disaster class that he had in Silverstone. Much better, and obviously destroyed Sebastian Montoya. Sebastian Montoya gets a 4 out of 10, and I think that's generous. This was the F3 version of Sebastian Montoya back again, slow in qualifying, nothing to show for in the sprint race, and then in the feature race, he's one of the few drivers that's spun, caused a safety car. Very disappointing from Sebastian Montoya this weekend, and I think 4 is generous, but I've got to take into account it's his first season in F2. It's heavy rain, so I don't want to be too harsh. But that said, he's the one that caused the incident. And a couple of low scores coming up for the Dams pair. Jack Crawford gets a 1 out of 10, just like Richard Verschoor. In the sprint race, he's out at the first corner. And then in the feature race, he's been very lost all weekend, running off track, going through the gravel, not showing any pace, lousy qualifying. This is the problem with Jack Crawford. He can be very inconsistent. He can be brilliant one weekend and lousy the next weekend. And he'll probably, somewhere, he's going to have another good race, either at Monza or Baku, whenever the next races are coming up, or Hungary, I don't know, but he'll have another brilliant race, but there's probably another bad race in there somewhere. And of course, qualifying, the bugbear is back. Very slow, very disappointing, I would say, being out qualified by the likes of Cordeal and Stanek and Miata. I don't know, Deems, they can't get on top of that qualifying. And then Kush Miney, another third season driver, one of the oldest drivers on the grid, gets a 2 out of 10, was having little offs, little moments all weekend, lousy qualifying, running around at the back with Esterson and Shields, oh, 2 out of 10. Expect so much more from him. Omari Cordeal gets a very specific 6.5 out of 10. He showed a lot of pace around his home circuit. And in the sprint race, he is battling for a podium in the closing stages, but refuses to give up the place, runs into the side of Victor Martins and damages his car. Very, such an amateurish mistake, and he's in his fourth season now. You'd think he'd have clued on. Sometimes you got to pick your battles, and then in the feature race, he's been fairly anonymous. After all the kerfuffle, he's come out with 1 point from the weekend for 10th place. Unbelievable. And Alex Dunne, I don't want to talk too much about him. Sometimes too much praise undoes the point of the praise. I'm going to give him a 15 out of 10. I've got to be fair. I gave him a -10 in Monte Carlo. Monaco, I wanted to punish him for how dreadfully he drove there, but he drove superbly today. 15 out of 10. Uh, One thing I would say, I think he's the most impressive driver in the McLaren stable this weekend. I'll say that and I'll leave it there. Victor Martins gets an 8 out of 10. He's a little bit shown up by his teammate, but I think he drove a good weekend. I think his move around the outside of Cordeal into Lacombe was fair enough, and he's kept it on the road. I don't understand these endless time penalties in the. I don't see where he's gaining the advantage by running wide at some corner, but anyway, they don't even show it, so I can't really comment or much on it. I think it's bullshit, that's what I really think. And then Ratomo Mayata gets a 10 out of 10. Sensational weekend from Ratomo Mayata. Qualified second, as I said before, the margins in the top 10 behind the pole, from second downwards, they were very tight margins. He's come out with second place at a driver's circuit. He was fantastic in the rain. He was chasing after Alex Dunne, and he's had a little spin, but this is by far his best weekend. So, and it's very hard conditions in the pouring rain at Spa-Francorchamps, so I suppose I'll have to cut him a little bit of slack. And he eventually came away with P2, though, as you know, I'm not happy about these penalties, but whether it's deserved or not, it's a fantastic result from Ratomo Mayata. Sami Megatunov gets a 7 out of 10. Nothing special from the Trident pair. Max Esterson also gets a 7 out of 10. What I want to say, though, is I'm very glad they kept their cars on track. They didn't crash, they didn't cause safety cars, red flags in qualifying. Very difficult circuit, very difficult circumstances, conditions, pouring rain. So they deserve a 7 out of 10 for keeping the car on track and going relatively quickly. Joshua Dirksen gets a 9 out of 10. He drove a fantastic weekend and no one is going to remember it. I don't know what's happening this year with AIX and if their car is rubbish or if Dirksen isn't setting it up right or whatever. I don't know. Qualifies 21st, and in both races he's made his way through the field, made up 10 places in the sprint race, which is an excellent effort. He's made up nine, as the way I look at it, he's made up 9 places on track in the feature race as well. That's fabulous from Joshua, fabulous driving from Joshua Dirksen. And Chan Shields, I'll give him a 7 out of 10 for the same reason I gave Sami Megatunov and Max Esterson a 7 out of 10 because of his driving, keeping it on track and not crashing. John Bennett gets an 8 out of 10. He actually finished ninth in the sprint race, which is an excellent result for him. And he's been towards the top of the, what can I say, the back of the midfield. He's been at the top. He's looked fast all weekend. He's had the measure of Vil Gomez. I think a good weekend for John Bennett, a turning point. For the VAR, it's not enough for points. And then Rafael Villagomez, he gets a 7 out of 10. The the bad driver that's not that bad, kept it on the road for the most part. Nothing spectacular, but almost like a thank you for not crashing. And I suppose at the end of all that, I'll have to say a thank you to Cush Miney for keeping his car going when he was in the gravel and it touched the barrier. He's done a V, gone back on track, kept going, kept the race going. So well done to him for that. But I have to give him a 2 out of 10 because he's a third season driver. He should be driving better. I think a lot of people will be impressed with Alex Dunne after this weekend. But, um, all the drivers, except for a couple that I've taken to task, have done very well this race because they're very difficult conditions. It's a wonderful sight to see Formula 2 cars driving in the rain, and it's even more wonderful if it's at Spa-Francorchamps.